Hello there. Welcome to Business Incorporated on Channels Television. I am Bisi Adebayo. On today's show, South Africa's headline consumer inflation slows to 4.6% in July. And ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development has a $233 million shortfall of arrears paid up in capital. Plus, Nigeria's central bank chief, Emefiele, explains the impacts of the CBN's policies. Well, the stock markets in Africa is where we begin, and the numbers are mixed at intraday. Well, here in Nigeria, the all-share index is maintaining its upward trend with a 0.15% rise at intraday. The South African burst is also up 0.27%. The Egyptian stock market is down 0.62%, and the Kenyan market closed marginally lower at 166.57 on Tuesday. And the Gulf markets are mostly in the green at intraday, with shares in real estate investment trust and a major bank in Saudi Arabia were up this morning, while most equity markets in the region moved little. The Riyadh index rose 0.3%. Dubai's index was 0.38% up at intraday, as Emma Properties gained 0.8%, but GFH Financial, the most traded share, lost 2.7%. In Abu Dhabi, the index edged down 0.3%, weighed down by declines in blue chips. Qatar's index fell 0.1% in very thin trade. And in Europe, stocks slipped today, with investors assessing fresh data on the health of the Eurozone economy as a countdown to a key meeting of central bankers. PMI readings are also on tap, showing the Eurozone economy kept up its growth momentum in August, with a strong rise in manufacturing activity offsetting a slowdown in services. DWTV Channels TV financial correspondent Corin Busen is at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange to tell us how all these are impacting on market activities today. Many thanks for joining us, Conrad. How are investors and traders in Frankfurt digesting the ECB chief's Mario Draghi's statements today on why monetary authorities should always be ahead of the curve in terms of policies? Well, we'll get back to Conrad in just a moment. In the meantime, the rally on Wall Street looks set to fade out today, with trading subdued as investors turn their attention back to the Jackson Hole meeting of the global central bankers. Futures for the Dow Jones Industrial dropped 0.16% to 21,852, erasing parts of Tuesday's gain. Futures for the S&P 500 index dropped 0.2% to 2,447, while those for the Nasdaq 100 index gave up 0.2% to 5,866.25. Well, let's get back to Conrad Busen at the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Conrad, it's good to have you back. Well, how are investors and traders in Frankfurt digesting the ECB chief's Mario Draghi's statements, talking about why monetary authorities should always be ahead of the curve in terms of policies?
Well, BC, you know, people here have really been following this speech by Mr. Draghi very, very thoroughly. He gave it in Lindau, which is a beautiful lakeside town in southern Germany. And you mentioned Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Directly after this meeting today, Mario Draghi will hop on a plane to fly to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where this meeting of the most influential and renowned monetary policy makers of this world will happen. Janet Yellen will be there, of course. And of course, everyone on the market is expecting little signs, or maybe even more outspoken signs by the monetary policy makers about the future of monetary policies. Janet Yellen might be saying whether or not the Fed really starts ending its quantitative easing, its asset purchases as early as September. And Mr. Draghi in Jackson Hole might be, hinting at when to expect an eventual end of the asset purchases by the ECB. And that's why everyone sort of was focusing on what he had to say. Of course, he didn't talk about, actual monetary policies. The speech was for a group of Nobel Prize laureates and also young academics were in the audience. What he said sounded like a big plead in favor of the unconventional monetary policy measures by the central banks. He said, a large body of empirical research, and I quote this, has substantiated the success of these unconventional monetary policies in supporting the economy and inflation. And Draghi also said that we should continue to get prepared for new challenges. Now, if at all this is a hint on what he has to say in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, I would say this is not a hint on very decisive, statements to expect from him. Rather, it sounds like he says to the markets to get prepared for more time with those unconventional monetary policies.
Well, Conrad, let's talk about the Eurozone's factories data now, where we see activity measured by the Purchasing Managers Index remaining strong, going by the flash report released today. But why are the region's bursts still lackluster?
Well, of course, this manufacturing data was good, and it has a positive impact today on the markets, not on equity markets, but on the euro, which has climbed above $1.18 again. And that's, of course, a bit of a negative sign for our exporters here, who, might have to live with negative effects of the strong euro on their current earnings and their current balance sheets. Something else, of course, is on investors' minds. It's Mr. Trump and the, a bit spooky things he has to say, or he had to say in Arizona at this rally. He talked about that he might put up with a government shutdown if Congress didn't allow him the money to build a wall between Mexico and the United States. That, of course, reminds people on the markets that the debt ceiling in the United States will have to be lifted by the end of September. The government will need to be allowed to take on more new debt. If that's not going to happen, then technically, the United States might default on its debt. And this is a risk at the moment that people on the markets try desperately to, price in, which is probably a very difficult job to do. And that sort of ends up in a bit of a lackluster trading.
Now, from the corporate side of the street, now reports say that the EU Commission is investigating the big-ticket takeover of U.S. Monsato by Germany's Bayer. What are the authorities looking for in that particular deal?
Well, there's a lot of criticism of this mega merger of Bayer, or here in Germany we call it Bayer, and Monsanto, because, there has been a lot of concentration going on in this sector recently. There's been the mergers of Dow Chemical and DuPont, and of Syngenta and ChemChina. So corporations are getting bigger and bigger, and they get, of course, more powerful. They will have more money at their disposition to influence environmental policies, health policies, agricultural policies. And of course, the market power of those companies, including, Bayer and Monsanto and their combined forces, will be enormous. They might be able to dictate prices to agricultural markets, to, farmers, and their seed prices. They already have a very dominating position. That's criticized, and eventually this might end up, of course, in higher food prices. Monsanto, during the last decades, also acquired food companies in the United States. So their power to influence the price on what we eat might become too big, and that's, of course, something that the cartel authorities will have to take a very, very close look on.
DWTV Channels TV financial correspondent Conrad Bussen, many thanks for those updates, and see you again tomorrow.